Today we have Alina Nevins with us today. She is the Assistant Director for IT Office for International Students and Scholars. And thank you, Alina. We have her doing a 1-hour presentation on Zoom like a pro. So I'm going to hand it over to Alina to get us started. Thank you, Alina.
Thank you, Lorraine. Hi, guys. Yep, so my name is Alina Nevins. My pronouns are she and her. And I also welcome you to update your personal pronouns if you'd like, or update your name. And I will show you how to do that on the next slide. But let me do a little bit of housekeeping first. You are going to be muted the entire time. You won't be able to unmute yourself. If you have any questions or comments or have any clarification questions, please submit them in chat. And the questions I'll answer at the very end during the question and answer session, because I can't see anything in chat while I'm presenting. But if it's a clarification question, I've told Lorraine she's welcome to interrupt me and ask. Also, we are going to be sharing a recording of this presentation and these slides with you afterwards. There are a number of things in the presentation that are underlined. You can click on them and they'll take you to websites with further information about things. So let's get started. First things first is if you'd like to update your name or add pronouns, you can do so now by clicking the three horizontal dots on the top right of your picture and select rename. Just to let you know, this doesn't change your name permanently. You can do that by editing your profile. This is just for this specific session. All right, so we're going to go over the agenda for today. So first I want to set, a few expectations of what this presentation is and what it's not. This isn't going to be an introduction to Zoom or how to use Zoom. I'm going to include links about how to do that in the resources section. So I recommend you check that out if you're a total beginner. And we are also going to cover regular Zoom, not Zoom webinar. And we're not going to be able to cover everything. Obviously, we only have an hour together. So there are, as I said, underlined things in this presentation that you'll be able to click on for more information later. But we are going to talk about selected security settings to be aware of and also tips to run a successful presentation or meeting. And as a caveat, these are recommendations based on a combination of, my experience over, year and a half now of running Zoom meetings and Yale security recommendations. But of course, one size doesn't fit all. So different things might work for your department or your situation than what works for mine. But the goal I'd like everyone to get out of this is for you to get ideas and understanding of what these settings are and inspiration to make this your own. So, as I said, you're going to have to determine the best security settings for your situation and for your meeting format. I'm going to just do a quick definition of the two different types of formats I'm going to discuss today. One is a presentation, and that's much more, a top-down, one or few amount of speakers and multiple audience members. And that is a very one-way conversation. And on the other end, you have a conversation, which is more of a team meeting. It's a multi-way conversation. And those are going to help you decide what types of security settings you're going to use. So we're going to talk about, in this session, we're going to talk about general security tips and default settings that you should be aware of and consider. We're going to talk about best practices for running a Zoom presentation, and also what to do in case of a coordinated attack or other in-meeting security considerations. Then we're going to share resources and links, and lastly, answer any questions. So first off is general Zoom tips. You probably know all of this, but I'm going to go over it just in case. Number one is you want to make sure that your Zoom is always up to date. If you have a managed workstation, that's done a little bit differently, so you can click that link for more information. But Zoom is always adding new security and usability features. So to make sure that you have the most up-to-date version, for sure, make sure that's updated. Next is when you are scheduling a Zoom meeting and you're sharing it with people, make sure that you do not share that Zoom meeting link publicly. Of course, sometimes you have to, depending on the situation, but I strongly recommend you require some sort of registration, which we will discuss in a little bit. And third is I recommend you use at least one of these security options, waiting room passcode or require authentication. And I'll go through each of those later as well. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you are familiar with and that you understand all the security settings, both while you're scheduling and inside a meeting, and that you practice things like what to do in case of a Zoom bombing or some kind of disruption like that. All right, so this is a little graphic put together that kind of shows you how the effort it takes to secure a meeting goes up exponentially if your meeting link is widely available. So if you post your Zoom meeting link on social media or a website, bad actors, the bad guys will scan things like that for open links and share those with people who want to disrupt meetings. So that is why I highly recommend you require some sort of registration when you share your Zoom link. If you require registration and everything's really secure, you can probably run the meeting yourself. But if it's the link is widely available, you're probably going to need a team to manage your security and use much more strict settings, which I'll go through in a little bit. Other considerations on how much effort it requires to secure your meeting, things like how tech savvy you are, how good at multitasking you are, and also the stakes of the presentation, your audience, and the meeting format, as I discussed earlier. Okay, so here's where there are registration options, and I recommend you do one of these three, or could be another way as well. But the first one is there is a registration feature inside Zoom, and it requires or participants to enter in their name and their email before they can enter the meeting. So it keeps people a little bit more honest. You don't have just random people joining. The only little note for this is you need to schedule the meeting with the website, not with the app or the Outlook plugin. Next is by creating an event in Yale Connect or campus groups. You can create an event that's only visible to people who are logged in, and you can configure it so they only see the Zoom link if they register for the event. Yale Connect is great because everyone with a Yale Net ID already has an account for it. And registered guests can also so non-Yale people can get accounts, but they need to be vetted first. And then some other options, you can require TMS or BMS registration like we did today, and share the link with you afterwards, or Google Forms or something like that. But you definitely want to make sure that you are collecting some sort of information before sharing that meeting link with people. All right, so I'm going to get into Zoom security settings here. And there are 3 different places that you can actually access Zoom security settings, because why not? The first one is on the website, and you click on settings. You can see all the default settings when you're creating a brand new meeting. So if you change something there, it will then be the setting for now on every time that you create a new meeting. There's another set of settings when you're actually going to schedule a new meeting. And then there's a third set of settings when you're actually in the meeting under the security tab, the participants tab, and the chat tab. So first, we're going to talk about that first set of default security settings. Again, you can get there by logging into the website and clicking on settings, and you will see a whole very long list of lots of security settings. I'm going to go through the top most important ones here, because you definitely want to be aware of these things. So number 1 is the waiting room that you probably saw when you joined this meeting. It's a way for you to keep people sequestered before your meeting starts. It lets you control when people can join. It's great even if it's a one-on-one meeting, you're waiting for someone, it can give you time to prepare. If it's a group meeting, it helps you welcome everybody all at once and avoid that kind of awkwardness, paper shuffling type of thing. Another thing is, pro tip, you can customize your waiting room, and click on that link to find out more about that. Next is a passcode. So that it's considered best practices to use a passcode with your account, or with your new meetings, but I always wonder, does it actually make your meeting more secure? By default, the Zoom will embed your passcode in the URL. And this is an example right here of what that looks like. And that last part of it, that is the password embedded in the URL. So if you copy that entire thing, you could send it to someone else and they'd have the password. So, you know, there's really no point. It negates the whole purpose of having a passcode. So I recommend you turn that off. You turn off embedding password code and you send the password separately. Now, a little caveat with that is that a lot of people will not see that there's a separate passcode. So you need to make sure that it's very visible, maybe even send it to them more than once. Otherwise, you'll get a whole lot of messages saying, I didn't get a passcode to get in. So best practices require a passcode, but make sure that people know about it. And then lastly is requiring authentication. So what this means is that only people with Zoom accounts can enter the meeting. By default, it's anybody with a Zoom account. You can also put that you need to have maybe CAS, login, Yale login to be able to enter the meeting. It's not super useful when you have a meeting with non-Yale people, but this is something that might be useful for you if it's definitely only open to Yale people. One thing you do need to be aware of is there are actually different accounts inside the Zoom umbrella for Yale. There's the regular Zoom accounts, and then there's HIPAA accounts, which is people who are associated with the med school and the hospital. So if you are doing something that is only open to Yale, you need to just be aware of that if you see that setting. All right, next is same place. It's still in the default settings, and it's under a heading called scheduling. Two things here I want to point out is whether you want to allow people to join a meeting before you or not. This is something you might want to allow if it's going to be a team meeting and maybe you're running late. You want people to be able to get in there without you. But this is not something you'd want if it's going to be a presentation. This isn't super applicable if you have a waiting room, because people will just be put into the waiting room. They won't join the actual meeting. But if you don't have a waiting room, you'll want to consider that. And then last here is muting all participants as soon as they join. I like to do this by default to prevent any embarrassing moments of somebody talking to the person they're in the room with, not realizing their mic's on. That has happened to me before. So just to prevent that in the future, I like to make sure that everybody is muted as soon as they enter, and they can unmute if they want, depending on the situation. All right, and then lastly, for the default settings. And again, all of these settings are default settings that go for all the meetings you schedule from now on. But a lot of these settings you can change when you're actually scheduling the meeting or when you're in the meeting. But I want to make sure that you guys know about all of these settings to begin with. So first is about chatting. Here you can disable or turn on, allow chatting. And what I like to do is make sure that private chats are not allowed in a larger situation. You don't want people to be able to chat anybody else. You only want people to be able to chat the group, for example, or maybe just the host. And I also like to disable sending files via chat so that somebody doesn't decide to send, inappropriate pictures or something like that. As far as screen sharing, this is where you can say if you want other people to be able to share their screen beside you, and if you want to prevent somebody from taking sharing ability away from the person who's currently sharing. You probably don't want anyone but the host to have that privilege. So I recommend making that setting. Next is about annotation. So annotation is something like this, where you can draw on a screen. The crazy thing about this is that by default, anybody can draw on my screen. Don't try it because I turned this off already. But in the settings, this is a brand new setting they added recently, which I'm very happy about. It will let you disable annotation. You probably don't need annotation at all. You can always turn it on specifically for a meeting. But at the very least, if you're going to have it on, I would check only the user who is sharing can annotate, not just anybody. And next is about removed participants. If you're removing a participant, you probably don't want them to be able to just join back again. So you'll want to disable the ability for them to rejoin. And then last on here is about profile pictures. So if you have a large meeting that you need to keep very, very secure, I'd recommend turning off the cameras for all your participants and also hiding their profile pictures. And this is because theoretically, maybe they're not showing anything distracting or bad on their screen because they can't because the video's off, but they could always upload a picture that might be inappropriate for everybody to see. So to be super secure, I'd say have them hide profile pictures and disable the ability to rename themselves as well. All right, so then we're going to talk about settings that you get when you're actually scheduling a meeting. And you guys have probably seen this screen before. So when you're actually scheduling a meeting, I'm not going to go over all the settings here because we talked about a few of them before. We're going to skip over stuff like passcodes and waiting rooms, but these are things that are either primarily here or only here. So first of all, there are 3 different ways for you to schedule a meeting. You can either schedule it from the web, you can schedule it from the app, or you can schedule it within Outlook. I'm going to talk about, in general, all 3 of them. The most important thing to know is that if you want to require registration, you can only do that through the web version, but all the other ones you can do any version. So first of all is meeting ID. You're going to want to make sure that you are always using an automatically generated meeting ID, not your personal meeting ID. Your personal meeting ID is always the same. So you don't want, somebody to be able to click on an old link and join your current meeting. Next is registration. As I said, only available in the web version. But what this does is it requires participants to enter in their email address and name and some other information about themselves before they can actually join. And video here, this is where you can specify if you want video to be on for the meeting, either for yourself or for other participants. And then lastly, alternative hosts. I always recommend setting at least 1 backup host in there just in case. Your account, your internet goes out or something like that. Just as a little caveat here, the alternative host has to be in your account. So whether you're HIPAA or not HIPAA, if for some reason you need to make someone a co-host and they're not in your account, you can always do that later. So it doesn't have to be done now, but it's a good idea to do it now so that you don't have to worry about it later. All right, so that is all the
Alina, can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
The host, so if you're unable, because we actually had a problem with this, if you're unable to add them as a host because they're not they're not in your account, like either you're under the HIPAA firewall or they're under the HIPAA firewall, either way, they're different accounts. What you're saying is you can make them alternative hosts later in the meeting by boosting them up into the host status, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And if you have a waiting room, you'll have to release them from the waiting room first. But yes, that is how you would make them a co-host later.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so that is everything for settings ahead of time. Now I'm going to talk about best practices when actually preparing for your presentation and doing the presentation. So the first thing I want to mention is a presentation or successful presentation, especially when you're first getting started, is really a team effort. I've made up these 4 completely arbitrary roles. Don't take these seriously. I've made them up. And it doesn't have to be 4 different people doing these. It could be 1 person. It could be 2 people. It really depends on, if the Zoom link's publicly available, how tech savvy you are, how good you are at multitasking and that kind of thing. But the important part is that each task is clearly defined and that it's obvious who is responsible for those tasks if you have more than 1 person. So the idea is that you'd have each person be a co-host and that you have backups as well for each role in case something happens. So really quick overview of what each of these roles are. The speaker, of course, is the person who speaks. And it's most important for them to look and sound their best. And because they only focus on speaking, there's a lot less distraction for them, and they can focus on getting the message across. The chat wrangler.
Alina,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I meant to interrupt you before you got to speaker, but I didn't get to my unmute button quick enough. Bonnie has a question, a clarifying question on the material that you were just talking about. Her question is around alternate host. If she's using her boss's calendar, will he automatically be the host?
So if you're using his calendar and you're scheduling it as him, like you're logged in as him, or do you have like delegated access to it? That's where the difference is. I can talk to you about this a little bit later because there's a lot of specifics in there.
Okay.
I would say add him
Hold
just
that
in
one.
case, just to be on the safe side.
The Zoom links are attached to your email, unless you're probably in his calendar though, right?
Yeah, it depends on
Yeah.
how that's configured.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And so yeah, chat wranglers, person who keeps an eye on the chats. Again, when you're sharing your screen or presenting, it can be really distracting. So it's good to have somebody to handle chat, like chats at the very least. Third is the technology wrangler. This is usually my job, so I'm very familiar with it. But it's the person who, confirms all the settings ahead of time and handles any settings that need to be changed during the presentation, manages the waiting room and that kind of thing. And then lastly, but not least, is the slideshow driver. And that is the person who shares their screen. And I'm going to say this again later, but it's super important to practice screen sharing so you know exactly what's being shared and what's not. As a pro tip, I recommend all the members of your team to change their background to something similar to kind of brand and identify yourself as a team. And it also helps people figure out who the host of the meeting is. All right, so that is just consideration for creating the meeting. Another consideration is you definitely want to have a disruption plan. So a disruption could be something innocuous, like there's a connection issue. Somebody's computer crashes or their internet goes down. It happens all the time. So you always want to have an alternate communication method, whether that's texting or team chat or something outside of Zoom, just in case. But you want to, communicate about that ahead of time and have one channel decided upon, and just in case of an emergency. And then also you want to make sure that you have a backup slideshow driver, just in case the slideshow driver computer crashes or something like that. Next consideration for a disruption is a coordinated disruption, what the kids are calling Zoom bombing nowadays. And that is when bad actors join a Zoom meeting for the purpose of disrupting it. Ideally, this won't happen if your security settings are set properly and you don't share your Zoom link publicly. But this is very important to be aware of. As I said earlier, make sure your Zoom is up to date. Because security settings change. Well, old versions of Zoom don't always pay attention to the new security settings. So for that reason, it is really a good idea to practice all of these steps ahead of time with your team so that you're not like deer in the headlights. Oh my goodness, what do I do? Practice it so that it's smooth and it feels normal, and you'll look, like you're on top of everything, which is very important. As far as a coordinated disruption like that, the first priority is, of course, the well-being of all the event participants and the hosts. So these actions are going to be things that I recommend the tech manager and the speaker do, but it could be anybody. The first things first, make sure you mute the person who's disrupting things. You can do that by clicking participants and then mute to the right side of their name. You can kick them out by removing them, doing participants more and then remove. And also I recommend always expect multiple people to join the disruption attempt. Just because one person was disrupting, you kick them out. They could have either created another account, or there could be multiple people trying to brigade or join your Zoom meeting and cause a disruption. So because of that, I recommend locking the meeting, which prevents anybody new from joining back again. But worst case scenario, you're getting overwhelmed. The button to know about is suspend participant activities. And that basically does everything I mentioned. It also turns off the participant videos, audio, ability to share screen, totally locks down the room, and it will give you a chance to kick out people who need to be kicked out and get the situation under control. The fifth thing you want to make sure that you're doing is communicating with the audience. And as you regain control of the room, you want to acknowledge what happened, denounce and name the actions by their intent and their impact, maybe like sexist or racist or homophobic, that kind of thing. And also provide a space for everyone to pause and reflect and to process what's going on and what just happened. You don't want to pretend it didn't happen. It's definitely the elephant in the room. Everybody knows what just happened. So you want to acknowledge it. And depending on the audience, you might want to invite participants to write about or talk about the reactions, publicly or privately, or even step away from the screen, maybe take a break and then come back to the meeting. Next is you definitely want to report the event to Zoom and to the Yale police. And both of those links there will tell you how to do that. 8 is I recommend reaching out to support. There are a whole lot of members of the Yale community that provide support and resources for things like this, like mental health, SHARE, employee assistance program, the chaplain's office. I definitely recommend reaching out to, one or more of those offices, in case this happens to you. And then also, lastly, you want to follow up with your audience afterwards, explicitly acknowledge the impact and the harm that incident, of what happened, and provide options for support applicable to the event audience and the disruption, maybe links, or recommendations or things like that. So it's a very serious situation. You want to make sure that you are handling, with as much grace as possible, and have practiced this ahead of time so you're on top of it. All right, next. Well, we're going to get into a little bit more fun stuff. So ahead of time, maybe a day or two ahead of time of your presentation, I really recommend, so that you look and sound your best, that you rehearse, that you test everything. You do a dry run through with your entire team. You test all the features you're going to be using, like polling or whatever you're going to be doing. And that you test that disruption plan that I had just talked about. In terms of looking your best, you want to make sure that you have good lighting, especially if you're using a fake background. You need to make sure you have lighting right on your face. These different camera brands don't do a very good job at picking up you based on your background. So definitely good lighting right in your face. You want to make sure that, let me mention my favorite thing is called Touch Up My Appearance, and that's in the filtering sections. I like to say maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's Zoom's beauty filter. It does a little bit of a Photoshop like blurring effect that I like. I don't recommend using it too heavily because then people won't recognize you when you're back in the office. But a little bit is nice. Little get rid of your wrinkles. Make sure your webcam is at eye level, and you want to test to see what angle works best for you. I find looking up at a camera is usually more flattering for me. I didn't have a choice today, but I tend to like that more. Make sure your camera is centered on you like a portrait. It's not too high or too low, and you're not too close or too far away. You want to make sure you're making eye contact as much as possible. Looking at the direction of the camera when you're talking. A trick I use for this is I set up my notes to be right behind right next to my camera. I have 2 screens so that I'm actually reading my notes, but it looks like I'm speaking more towards you rather than looking off into the space and to the side. It's a lot more engaging to do that type of eye contact. And if you don't need notes, but maybe you like to see your attendees' faces while you're presenting, you can always switch to gallery view and move your gallery of participants by your cameras too. So you can take a look at and see what people are doing. I recommend using either a clean background or a virtual background, and I'm using a virtual blurring background right now. You don't want anything distracting. I would avoid for presentations anything that has moving components to it. Next is you want to make sure you're wearing a neutral or a solid colored top. And you're welcome to wear crazy pants or no pants at all, whatever you'd like there. No one will question that. Just as far as your top, make sure you're not wearing any stripes or crazy pattern. You want to make sure that you are, as little distraction as possible. Zoom also has a couple of virtual filters, which you probably should avoid. They're definitely try them out for fun because they're fun. There's like, you can do a hat and like a pirate eye patch and that kind of thing. Not a good idea to use those in a presentation unless it's a presentation about Zoom filters. If you haven't seen it already, there is an excellent video of a guy who turned on a cat filter and couldn't figure out how to turn it off in a professional setting, which I've linked to from here. So if you haven't seen it, please check it out. You can click on that video. All right, and now as far as sounding good, you're going to want to make sure you're in as quiet of a location as possible. No screaming kids, barking dogs, or echoing or anything like that. I recommend using headphones that are wired with a mic, not Bluetooth headphones, because Bluetooth, it cuts out randomly from time to time, and that's not a good time for it to cut out during your presentation. You want to make sure that you speak clearly and not too quickly. That is definitely I always speak too quickly, so trying to slow down a bit. But the goal is to make it as easy as possible for people to understand your message that you're trying to get across. A couple of miscellaneous things. Record yourself ahead of time to verify that you look and sound your best, that nothing weird is going on in the background that you couldn't tell. You want to make sure, this is a silly one, but I've done it. Make sure your computer's plugged in if you're on a laptop. You don't want to get a low battery thing while you're presenting. And lastly, make sure you have a good internet connection, like you're plugged into the Ethernet or you're somewhere with very dependable Wi-Fi. The worst thing is while you're presenting, bad connection comes up on your screen and then you're cutting out for everybody. Oops. I was opening the cat video. Don't want to do that. All right, so we're going to talk now about 15 minutes ahead of time. I like to schedule 15 minutes ahead of time for people to join the meeting who are going to be presenting or part of the organization team. It gives everybody a chance to make sure, for the speaker that their camera and their mic works properly, that they can move their notes and anything they want around under the camera. That for a slideshow, you want to make sure that the screen sharing is done correctly and disable that setting for annotating shared content. I'll show you in the next slide. You want to have this, the title slide brought up so that when people come in, that's the first thing they see. Slideshow driver, also make sure you turn off any notifications. You don't want, text messages from your boo to come up during your presentation. And then the tech manager this is when they would set a co-host. For example, there's a non-Yale person who needs to be a co-host. They're in your waiting room. You can let them in from the waiting room and give them co-hosting privileges there. And this is when I recommend enabling automatic live transcription. It's a really cool closed captioning thing. I enabled it for this meeting if you want to check it out. It is one reason why it's good to speak clearly and slowly so that picks you up. This is when the tech manager will confirm all the security and participant and chat settings. And I'm going to go over that next. Okay, so I've kind of broken these up between, like I said, presentation, which is much more like a webinar. It's going to be higher security, very few presenters, and lots of attendees. It's a one-way conversation. Versus a conversation, which is more like a team meeting, lower security. Everyone needs to be able to talk or chat or screen share. It's much more of a conversation. So, your specific, event is probably going to be somewhere between the two. Also considering how widely available that Zoom link is, you might want to make things more secure. But I'm going to talk about these settings in the context of your meeting format. So for the first most important setting while you're in the actual meeting, and again, this is like 15 minutes ahead of time you join to go through all of these things. You can click on the security button on the bottom. And I like to verify all of the settings, even though I, already set them ahead of time. I like to just make sure that everything is done correctly. So for example, for a presentation, you probably want to make sure people cannot share their own screen. Maybe you want to disable chat. Perhaps you want to, allow people to start their video, but you don't want them to unmute themselves. These are different options to think about. And here's where you can uncheck the annotate on shared content option. You can see that when you're screen sharing. But for a conversation, you can allow it to be much more open, allow people to share their screen and chat and all of that stuff. Definitely less of a security consideration there. All right, so participant settings, which you can get to by clicking participants and then more at the bottom right-hand corner. These are things like making sure everybody's muted as soon as they come into the meeting, playing the join or leave sound. If it's a lot of people, I always turn this off because it's very distracting. Here's also where you can allow people to unmute themselves or rename themselves or start their video. Next is for presentation. These are chat settings. You probably can leave, for a general team meeting, you can leave the chat settings as is. But for a presentation where you want to lock it down much more, you can specify here who people can chat with, whether they can chat with anybody, which is how we have it set up today, or if they can only chat with the host. So again, totally depends on your situation, whether you want it to be super secure lockdown or not. But here's how you can control that. In a large presentation, you probably want to disable direct chatting at the very least. So I would say, they're one of the top three. You don't want people to send weird messages to one another. All right, so next is, it's 2:55, your presentation's at 3 o'clock, and it's almost go time. So first thing is the tech manager is going to start the recording. I recommend recording to the cloud because it gives you a whole lot more options in terms of video formats and all of that. Then they are going to release everybody from the waiting room. Oh, also one more thing about recording. I recommend starting the recording right before you're about to release everybody, because that prevents you from having to edit out those 15 minutes ahead of time later on if you're sharing the video. Okay, then next is, release everybody from the waiting room. And you can do that all at once by clicking admit all in the participants window, or you can admit people one by one. And then optionally, you can disable the waiting room, which I recommend doing after you let everybody in. What that means is that the next time somebody clicks on your link, they get taken directly into your presentation instead of staying in a waiting room. If you did want to keep the waiting room open, for example, you want to vet people before they're allowed into the meeting, you'll want somebody to keep an eye on that. Otherwise, I was talking to Larry earlier about getting lots of messages saying like, I'm trying to get in, but I'm in the waiting room. So yeah, be aware of that. You probably want to disable it. And then last is you can lock the meeting, which prevents anybody new from joining at all. Good for security, bad for people who are running late. So consideration depending on your audience and your presentation style. All right, so the presentation has started. And here is what each role is in charge of during the presentation. The tech manager is going to be on alert for disruptions. They're going to manage any setting changes. For example, if you're going to be unmuting people at the end for Q&A. And they can also manage the spotlighting the video, which is when you can have, let's say I want, somebody else's video to be showing right now while I'm presenting. Generally, the person who's presenting, the person who's speaking is always the active video. This is a way that you can have another video be the active video, even if they're not speaking. There's more details if you click that. Next, the speaker does their welcome and their introduction. If you have the renaming enabled, I recommend encouraging people to change their names and add their pronouns, to be welcome. And this is also when you do your housekeeping, like if it's going to be recorded, if you'll be sharing the slides after the presentation, let everybody know at the beginning of the presentation so they don't feel like they need to write everything down. You'll also want to let people know about technical stuff, like if they'll be muted, if their camera is going to be off the whole time, to prevent people from thinking there's a technical issue or there's a problem with their computer. And then lastly, make sure you are clear on how you'd like people to ask questions and how you'll be answering them. Next is Chat Wrangler. As I said before, person who monitors chats. It is great to have somebody do that for you. And they can also paste in links, if you're going to be getting to a part where you need everybody to click on a link during a presentation. That person knows, as soon as you say this, paste this link in and has all that stuff ready to go. Next is the slideshow driver, of course, person who pays attention to the presenter and changes slides. So all presenters, basically make sure you're muted unless it's your turn to speak. And don't forget to unmute. There have been so many times where I've been talking and I was thinking everybody could hear me, but they couldn't because I was muted. So just a little reminder, screenshots of what the bottom of your screen looks like. If you're muted and your camera's off, it's the strike through, the red line. If you're unmuted and your camera's on, as you speak, you will see the green volume level move, and the video doesn't do anything, but there's no red line through it. All right, so here are a few pro tips, just based on my experience in terms of running Zoom meetings. I haven't seen all of these in one place, so I just wanted to go through a couple of them. One is for engaging participants. I was planning on doing a poll for this, but the setting wasn't on. Polls are a lot of fun. The only thing is you need to specify that people need to click submit when they're done with the poll, because that is not clear. People will fill things out and then think it's, that their information has been taken, but it hasn't, not until they click the submit button. Breakout rooms are also another great way to engage participants. It's a good way to do like smaller group discussions, one-on-ones, or maybe, 2 or 3 people together. There's so much to know about breakout rooms. I'm not going to go over today, but click on that link to learn more. If you are in a group where it's a team meeting and everybody's kind of expected to speak, if you were in one room together, it would be pretty obvious whether you're in a circle or there's some order, who's supposed to go next. It's always very awkward when there's a bunch of people in a meeting and nobody knows who's the next person to speak. So if you're the facilitator, make sure that you are calling on the next person to speak, or you could do something like the popcorn method, which is where you ask the person who speaks to specify who the next person is. Then when practicing screen sharing. So again, practice ahead of time. I can't tell you how many times people have been thinking they've been sharing something and they were sharing something different. Another thing is if you have 2 different screens, you want to be comfortable switching between the 2 different screens. In PowerPoint, when you're presenting in PowerPoint, it gives you a presenter view and then a regular slide view. And sometimes you're not actually sharing the right version of that. Be aware of how to switch between those 2. If you're going to be sharing video or sound, there is an extra option that you need to check. Otherwise, your video will be very choppy and no one will hear what you're trying to play. And now about chats. This is just a tip. Chats are not historic. If you post something in chat and a new person joins, they will not see anything that was in there before. So just something to be aware of. You might need to repost something if necessary. Next is the waiting room. As I said, I do like the waiting room a lot. I recommend that if you're running late to message people, as I did earlier today. It just gives people, lets people know, they're not just sitting waiting for nothing. We're going to be there. We're just waiting for everyone to join us. And again, you can customize the waiting room. You can add your logo. You can add a message there. There are a couple different things you can do. And then lastly is sharing your recording. If you don't care, if you don't want to restrict your video, you just want to put it out there for the world, you can put it on YouTube, Vimeo, any kind of, or Zoom even will host it. It's super easy to do it that way. But if you want to restrict your video to be like NetID password restricted, I don't recommend you use Zoom because there is that issue again with sharing videos with HIPAA versus non-HIPAA accounts. And additionally, pretty soon I hear that they are going to be clearing out old video recordings off of Zoom. So don't keep it there, download it. And ITS is recommending you use Microsoft Stream, which is like part of Teams. And there's a link to more instructions if you click that. Yes. And then we have resources. There's a whole lot of resources I'm not going to go through, but the first part is from Yale ITS. They have a whole lot of really detailed guides. The Purview Center has a lot of good information as far as securing your Zoom sessions and inside higher ed and Zoom. And then these were the ones I was talking about. If you are a beginner and you want to know more about the basics of Zoom, LinkedIn Learning, which is you can get free from Yale. So click that. It's usually, I don't know, $30 a month or something. So definitely take advantage of that. There's an introductory course there and an intermediate course that you can check out. And then lastly, if you are having trouble with Zoom or questions or problems, the ITS Help Desk is the group to call about that. Or if you're impatient like me, you can try looking it up on the Zoom support forums as well. Okay, so that is all I have. Oh, good. We're good with time. So I am going to go through the questions. Let's see if anybody has any questions in chat.
We had the person that asked, I think it was Suzanne, that asked about when she's in her boss's calendar, does that automatically make him the host? So I thought we can get that question.
Yeah, so it depends on if you're actually logged in as him. It should, and it's his Zoom account. That's a weird one, but it totally depends on how it's configured. Because you're either logged in as him and then yes, he's the host and you're gonna have to make yourself the co-host, or you're logged in as yourself, but you have delegated access, in which case you need to add him as the co-host. So it really depends on how it's configured.
She says she's not logged in as him.
Oh yeah, just to be safe, I would add both of you guys as the co-hosts for them, just in case, just be on the safe side. Next one is, how do you save chats? Okay, so there is a setting in the default settings, which I was talking about at the very beginning, that allows you to, as a default, it will save the chat as soon as you exit. And that is how you would do that. I don't know if there's a way to do that in, let me close, am I screen sharing? I wonder if there's a way to do it here. Oh yeah, so if you, actually you might not see it because I'm the host, but if in the chat, on the bottom right-hand corner, there's 3 dots that I can click and I say save chat. I think that might be just an admin thing though. But yeah, there is an option for that in your default settings. Okay, good. You can save chat. Yep. So it saves it to your computer, like as a really basic text file, not even like a Word doc or anything. It will be like a really basic text file. Oh, you mean on your computer itself? Yeah, I have a Mac, so I'm not sure exactly where it puts it on the PC, but that sounds right. In your Zoom folder. Closed captioning setting. Yeah, so as a host, you have a button that says live transcript. You can click that and enable automatic live transcription. And it's great. It's like, closed captioning. It's fabulous. As a viewer, though, you won't see that button. You'll see like closed captioning or something that you can turn on and off. Anything else? Any other questions? Good. Yeah, exactly. We do a lot of sessions. So Suzanne said it's very useful for hard of hearing people. We do a lot of sessions for people who don't speak English as their first language. So having the ability to have this text going on is very helpful. Also, when I share this video afterwards, you'll see there will be a chat, like what is it called? A transcript, a live transcript while I'm talking, and it will show you exactly what I'm talking about as it goes, which is very nice. And then you can search for what I said, earlier in the presentation and find it. I recommend that. Any other questions? All right, I'm thinking no.
No, I don't see any more.
Last chance.
I know I had one, but now I can't remember it. As you were going through the slide, I'm like, oh, I'll ask that at the end. Now I can't remember.
Okay, well then I guess if you think of anything, you could always email me. I might not be able to answer, but I might put you in touch with the help desk. I'm definitely
I may have one more.
not a Zoom expert. Oh yes, okay. I mentioned something about, I think I meant to say TMS, not VMS. Yeah, that is that training, the way that you signed up for this session. It's TMS, right, Lorraine?
So BMS is the back software that you set up classes in, and TMS is the training management system that participants see on the front end. So it's both.
Okay, yeah, I get confused between the two of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the main idea is make sure that you are requiring registration before sending out that Zoom link.
Yes.
Great. Next question. Is it true the host can see all chats regardless? No, I can't see anything sent directly to other people. I think when you download it, though, you might be able to. That I'm not 100% sure on. It's possible you might be able to see it when you download it, but like I can't see it in a regular, while it's going.
That's good questions.
Yeah, you might not want to do the office gossip in there.
It's never private.
No.
I think that's it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if anybody else has any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Get extra 4 minutes, I guess.
You got a bathroom trip in there.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Alina. I'm looking forward to going back on the material and clicking those links and learning.
Yeah, I know
more
there's a
stuff.
lot. So there's
open
a
up
lot of
lot.
information. So for sure, I'll be sending out these.
Well,
All
thank
right,
you so
everyone.
much.
Take
Bye-bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye.